Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to AMPC's webinar today, focused on packaging. And we're lucky enough to have Alan and Anna from Sealed Air here to present to us today, and they're looking forward to getting a number of your questions. So for any questions that you have today, for those that are new to this system, you have a questions tab on your toolbar. Feel free to type in your question, and then Alan and Anna will hopefully be able to answer your questions at the end of the session. If for some reason we run out of time or they want to get back to you, we'll make sure that they have your contact details to be able to give you some further information. So thank you once again for attending. At the end of the day, we'll have a brief survey. Really appreciate if you can fill that survey out. Just gives us some feedback on what other webinars you'd like to see, how the program's performing, and how your overall experience was. We've also got with us today Matt O'Brien, who is the AMPC Senior Program Manager, who looks after market access and has been doing a fair bit of work in the packaging space. So thank you as well, Matt, for joining. Okay,
No
and Adam, Alan and Anna, I'll hand over to you for today's presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for the quick introduction. Both Anna and I work for Sealed Air. Cryovac brand is probably one of the things you might be more familiar with. And so our aim today is to give you an overview of some of the key drivers that are influencing where we're headed to with packaging targets on the roadmap to 2025, generating sustainable packaging for the food industry. So just quickly about Sealed Air, we see ourselves as being in business to protect, to solve critical packaging challenges, and to leave the world better than we found it. And our core areas of business are fresh protein, extending shelf life in fresh protein space, and also working with the e-commerce area. I'm Alan Adams. My role in the business is Sustainability Director for the APAC region, and I'm based in Melbourne under lockdown, so enjoying time at home more than usual. Certainly not missing the plane flights every other week. And my role really is to help our customers on their journey towards sustainable packaging for the industries they're in, help you achieve your sustainability goals, and guide Sealed Air's path towards 2025. Anna, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Anna Bello. I'm the Fresh Red Meat Market Manager for Sealed Air, and I look after the Australia, New Zealand, Japan and Korea region. So my role is market sector lead, and what that involves is really keeping an eye on future industry trends and trying to anticipate where the market needs are so that we can develop services and solutions for the meat packaging industry, not just in the packaging space, but in automation and now into smart services. So we'd like to thank for having this opportunity to share with you what we're doing in this space.
Thanks, Anna. I'll take us through the first section, looking at what are the kinds of things that are driving the area of packaging in this fresh food business today, and try and share with you some insights as to what's driving the change that we need now, what are the kinds of changes and pressures that are upon us, and are these drivers for change. And then I'll hand it over to Anna to talk about a whole lot of the activity that Sealed Air is doing in this space to march us down that path towards achieving the 2025 goals. Thanks, Anna. So why is it that we need some change? Well, there are a number of key drivers that are pushing us to make a difference to the way in which we've treated packaging and the way in which we use packaging in the market today. We have really exploded the amount of packaging over decades into the environment for really good reasons. You know, plastic packaging particularly has evolved and developed. It's now highly efficient. and does a job that nothing else does anywhere near as well. And it's really, in many ways, the backbone of the lifestyles we enjoy today when it comes to our really wide choice of food and the opportunity to have whatever we want to eat from whatever culture, wherever we are, whenever we want. And increasingly with food on the go type trends, anytime, anywhere. But industry and infrastructure has not kept pace with cleaning up after ourselves with all of that generation of packaging. So we're starting to see quite a lot of news pressure that all really was crystallized in the start of 2018 when China closed its doors to taking the mixed plastic recyclables from all over the world. Suddenly, a problem of the amount of packaging that's not being recovered in our own countries became really on the radar for everybody. We all became very aware of it in a very short space of time. And today, those ideas have crystallized around the amount of waste there is, and a lot of talk about the amount of waste that's ending up in oceans because the way in which we're recovering materials is not as effective as it should be. And the outcome of that is that to drive change, a number of countries are looking at how do we incentivize the industry to make changes itself. And we see that coming out with noise around bans on various types of plastics, commitments to use various types of plastics or to reduce packaging materials in some space. Here in Australia, that's very much about pledges towards 2025 that the government has made, and that they're expecting the packaging industry overarching watchdog, if you like, or body, the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation, to drive into place. And we've found that our recycling systems are just not ready for the influx of the complex materials that we have in the market today. And that's probably more evident or more lacking in infrastructure, if you like, in the complex materials used in the fresh meat space. So very relevant to us. Thanks, Anna. So sustainability and corporate brand identity is raising itself as well. We're finding that large companies more and more are seeing that there is a need to be clear about what we're saying as an organization, how we're perceived around sustainability and our brand identity. And you see that paying out on the triple bottom line space. So impacting how we're managing and trying to improve our direct operations, that we're delivering through ethical supply chains, and that we're taking care of the communities in which we support, live and work. And we're looking more and more, we're seeing that just making statements isn't good enough. Real measures and goals are required, and that we need transparency around reporting. So this logo, GRI, is an example of one of those organizations that allows companies to report on what they are aiming to do and how they're progressing in a public and transparent way. In this age of modern communication, the ability to look into and review claims that company makes is very available. So transparency is a requirement to generate loyalty and trust in brand. Thanks, Anna. And they're changing materiality issues. So a materiality assessment is quite common now, looking at what are the key fundamental topics that key stakeholder groups are interested in. And the emerging ones we see at the moment are greenhouse gas emissions or carbon footprinting. And this is about climate change. The beauty of a greenhouse gas measure is that it takes into account all resources and gives us a measure of the total impact of our business. So we're seeing that emerge as a material issue. Alongside that, post-consumer waste. It's getting so much press attention, so much community noise that it is a key topic area for us. Thirdly, the rise of circular economies. Circular economies are important because we're recognizing that we need to retain the value of the resources we're consuming and use them over and over. So a longer term view is we've got a finite amount of resources. How do we keep using them? And I think the fourth one for particularly sealed air holds near and dear is that incrementally improving what we've done in the past will not achieve all of these lofty objectives around end of life of packaging, reducing food waste, and reducing our carbon footprint all at once. We need real innovation. So genuine step change and thinking around products is something that's very important, I think, and will lead to the kinds of outcomes we need. We've done incremental improvement for decades. Now we need some step change innovation, and we have to support that. I mentioned before that transparency is really important, and one of the other organizations that provides transparency on global footprint of resource use, the Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP, is a measure of that. And Sealed Air is very proud that we've been awarded 5 years in a row now leadership status for the impact we have on the wider supply chain that we're a part of. Thanks, Anna. So just making pledges and asking the world to change is probably not enough, or it's not moving fast enough. So governments are looking at how can they incentivize, and that's through 2 different routes. Really, it's extended producer responsibility programs, EPR, making people responsible for what it is that they're doing. And in coarse terms, that means paying or putting in place programs to clean up the products that we're putting into the market, or taxes. One can be a bit of a carrot approach and the other one a bit more of a stick. Taxes are challenging because often that money is just going into general coffers, so it really is just a penalty. But they're there to drive behavior change, to look at how do we reduce materials and usage total, reduce the types of materials that are more dangerous than others. That's typically referred to as non-essential single-use plastics, and incentivizing taking up recycling, which has a cost to it. And we're seeing labeling schemes rolling out. The 3 you can see on the right-hand slide or side of the slide here are from top to bottom the OPRL system from the UK, then the How to Recycle from the US, and our own Australian ARL logo program, which is actually gaining some regional traction, with New Zealand looking at it, Singapore, and some of the other countries of Southeast Asia. So these things are all coming towards us, trying to drive change. Thanks, Anna. From a tax perspective, a couple of fairly recent announcements that can have impact on us. Both Italy and the UK have flagged that they're going to enact plastics taxes. That's important to us because Australia so far has mirrored the UK's progress almost step for step. The pledge to 2025, the launch of the ARL logo program, just like OPRL, measurement through even a tool called PREP. So, you know, it's highly likely that with the UK launching a plastics tax, that Australia will follow suit and we will launch one as well. And that's business risk for all of us. So the specifics announced, the UK will tax products that have less than 30% recycled content, enacted in April 2022 at the rate of £200 per tonne. That's quite significant, you know, it's 40 cents a kilo. So if we get some kind of tax of that order, that will be something to help us consider managing it for certain. Thanks, Anna. Here's a quick study that we had a look at, checking out what are the top packaging environmental concerns of consumers. This was looking into a sustainable meat packaging study. And you can see here that oceans plastics is really high. It ranks highly in each of the countries that we were looking at, including here in Australia. So it's not surprising that a lot of action has been coalesced around the topic of preventing plastics getting into our oceans. Following that, you can see that the amount of food wasted is also an important issue. And Australia has a target of reducing our food waste by half by 2030. So we have a balancing act here in trying to recover packaging and make better outcomes with packaging, or reduce packaging, and at the same time reducing food waste. Often strategies to deliver good food waste outcomes require different types of packaging, potentially even more packaging if we think about serve sizes, for example. So there are challenges to wind our way through in the strategies that we choose for sustainable packaging. Thanks, Anna. Recycling, probably the thing that gets the most news attention, has the most noise, and certainly if public opinion is anything to go by, is what we need to tackle. And look, recycling really does get attention because it resonates with consumers. As a consumer, if we can put something in our curbside bin, that makes us feel good, feels like we've done something, it's a step in the right direction. It's available, accessible, and simple. Other concepts around sustainable packaging are less tangible, so not necessarily identified with at the consumer level as easily. Food waste, for example, is, we don't have a brand name on every piece of food that we lose or don't consume at home, so it's often not as well seen. So recycling programs have certainly some barriers in that consumers still have trouble understanding exactly what is recyclable and what is not, and having access to infrastructure for all types of packaging. Here in Australia, we see that with confusion around the home curbside bin, which is still only available generally to the public for rigid containers, where the huge amount of flexible packaging cannot go. And we can take it back to stores in the store take back program, but that implies more work and effort and organization, and is far more difficult for consumers to adopt. Thanks, Anna. For export marketers and for the past, a lot of packaging is carried what's called RIC codes, or resin identification codes. And there is real confusion around these as to whether they denote whether a product is recyclable or not. And that's been exacerbated in the past as some councils, and probably still today talk about collecting one of the codes or some of the codes numbered between 1 and 7. What they really are is resin identification codes. It only tells us what the product is made of, does not tell us where it can go or how it can be recycled, or is it recyclable. And code 7 really just means it doesn't belong to any one of the other groups. So that doesn't tell us very much at all. That's why we've seen the ARL logo being developed, which is more about a tool developed to tell a consumer, I'm hanging onto this piece of packaging, what should I do with it? Which option should it be? The bin, curbside, recycle, or take back to store? RIC codes are quite confusing, so we still use them in terms of design and aiming for types of material compatibility, but it's very much in an industry coding system, and a lot of confusion reigns over it still today. Thanks, Anna. Then there's compostable plastic. So this is something that I'm quite interested in as a member of the Australasian Bioplastics Association. Compostable packaging is being developed. Many companies are selling it, Sealed Air included. We're developing ranges of compostable packaging and selling some in parts of the market today. But for our space in this discussion, in this group of fresh proteins, compostable packaging still has some major challenges. Challenges primarily around performance and around cost. In performance, the lack of shrink capability, the inability to get it to tightly wrapped products, puncture resistance, and the challenge of handling moisture means that truly compostable packaging remains quite difficult to do without large compromises in shelf life, without compromises in the look of the packaging in terms of purge being able to be seen, and also in cost, as they are factorially more expensive than traditional polymers. Generally speaking, our thinking and most people's thinking is that composting can be a great solution for very certain circumstances. But ideally, from a packaging evaluation perspective, could we use less would be the first outcome. If we can do the job with less packaging, less packaging intensity, that's a better outcome. Could we reuse the packaging? Albeit very difficult in consumer packs within the fresh meat industry. Can we recycle? Keep using this, ideally using the same materials over and over for the same purpose. All of those are probably going to be better outcomes than composting. There are some circumstances, for example, developing the supply chain, if you like, for food waste, recovering food waste from a household to a processing site. Using compostable bin liners for that kind of application could be a really great outcome. So there's certainly some places where it can still play, but highly challenged in retail meat presentation, and often quite resource intense. Thanks, Anna. Today in our market and in many markets around the world, the agenda for us is largely being set by retailers, and retailers push to make claims about their range of packaging and their own sustainability outcomes. So we're seeing that with Coles and Woolies locally, aspiring to make many of their own branded products recyclable or able to carry either the curbside or the take back to store ARL logo this year. And that is a long way in front of the 2025 ambition and pledge that the government and ourselves and many others have made. So that's creating some pressure in the market. Aldi also is looking to roll out the logo by 2022, but as yet, as far as I'm aware, has not yet made an announcement on soft plastics recovery. They don't currently have recycle bins in their stores, so making an announcement about flexible plastics may come in the future, or it may be different to what Coles and Woolworths are doing because of that relationship there. The UK retailers are having an impact on us. Marks and Spencer have talked about not only are products able to be recycled, but that they will be widely recycled. And we are seeing a proliferation with the retailers in the UK right now, rolling out what we call a RAG system of packaging, or red, amber, green. Green being that's the type of packaging we're okay with, amber being we prefer not to have it, but we'll put up with it for a time period, and red, we want to exit this type of material as soon as we can. And that's driving the world agenda of packaging in many ways, because they're a destination for so many organizations exporting. So that will happen and is having an impact now. 2025 is our Sealed Air's target timeframe, and APCO's and the Australian government's. And you can see that Walmart and Carrefour have in-line programs with that. Also wanted to say that, just reference quickly here, that there is a balancing act between chasing recyclability of packaging on one hand, but also all of these retailers and ourselves and the government have commitments to reduce food waste. So that is a balancing act. And the next wave of types of claims and pledges that we're going to see, and I'm just starting to hear some of them now, are around carbon reduction commitments. We will hear them as things like net zero by 2030 or 2040, or halving carbon emissions by 2040. And that's really about organizations saying they're going to reduce their resource intensity substantially, reduce the amount of waste, reduce the amount of energy consumed, potentially reduce the amount of packaging, or packaging intensity can contribute to those goals. So it's about efficiency. It'll also be about the type of energy being consumed. So green energy will feed into this quite a lot, and it may bring up a driver for renewable resource content in packaging, which can have a carbon effect to offset the traditional plastics carbon. Thanks, Anna. So while there's a lot of focus on enabling consumer recycling, it's also a business-to-business challenge. While all the noise tends to be about consumers and the household, we have a significant amount of packaging flowing between us within industry. And there is a lot of packaging being used to transit materials product from abattoir to retail cutting facility, for example. And you can see here, we've done some analysis on where that packaging is and what type it is. And so the shrink bags, the majority of our shrink bags actually do not end up in households. They end up being used within industry, transferring from abattoir to cutting facility, or from abattoir exporting to cutting facility at some export destination. So we've broken out where that material is, and we're starting to look at how do we build programs that can recover that material, which is same complexity of material that we have at post-consumer. In many cases, it could be a contaminated stream as well, with blood contamination for opened bags. But how do we creatively create programs that can enable us to stand up as an industry and say, we're doing the right thing, we've got our own backyards in order, as well as what we're putting into the consumer market space. Thanks, Anna. So how is Sealed Air responding to these challenges? We've made our pledge, which is in line with APCO's pledge and the Australian pledge, to design all of our packaging to be recyclable by 2025. That all of our packaging will include, on average, our packaging will include 50% recycled content, of which 60% will come from post-consumer sources. And we'll lead collaborations with partners worldwide to increase recycling and reuse rates. And we're partnered up here with Red Cycle, for example, and talking to them about how we can create structures that fit better with their programs, for example. Thanks, Anna. I mentioned before in the materiality assessment that we need innovation. And these are the areas where we're looking at innovation rather than just incremental improvement of materials. How can we make materials that have post-consumer content? Can we advance renewable content? And designing for recycling systems that exist today or might exist in the future is a large piece of work for us. And I think it's an important strategy for every manufacturer to be thinking about today. Then there's an element of design. How do we put together packaging solutions that have thought creatively about eliminating components or being more efficient? And Anna will show you some of those examples going forward. Innovating in recovering infrastructure. How do we facilitate infrastructure that can recover more of the material types that are out there today? How can we have infrastructure that can take care of the high performance, low resource intensity, complex materials that we use today? And education. I love the ARL program because it is a way of engaging consumers to do the right thing with the packaging they have. Today's view, just randomly given a piece of packaging, perhaps with an RIC code on it, is a difficult way to give consumers advice on what's recyclable and what's not. Thanks, Anna. So, recycling is going to see a number of different loops in play for packaging. We make plastic at the top of the chain, our suppliers, then comes us as the packaging manufacturer, then to you, the goods packaging companies, typically through distribution into the consumer. So there's several types of recycling here. Reuse can run the same packaging in the same format for the same job back to the packaging packer. We can mechanically recycle, which is really like the Red Cycle program or our curbside bin, taking materials back to manufacture new packaging from materials in that path. And a new emerging technology is chemical recycling, pyrolysis and the like, which enables mixed consumer streams to be reprocessed by the primary resin manufacturers themselves, our suppliers. And they can technically make new materials that perform just like virgin, that someone like Sealed Air could use again. We're not there yet in terms of making it at scale and at a kind of price point, economical as we could yet. So that needs innovation over the next few years. But that's how the three kind of models of reusing and recycling packaging will work into the future. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks,
And with
Alan.
that, I'm going to hand over to Anna to take you through some of the things that are directly related to this industry. Cheers.
Thank you. So what does it all mean for the meat industry? Let's start with the consumer attitudes towards meat packaging. So we did a study of consumers last year in order to understand how meat packaging influences their purchase decision. It wasn't surprising that in many countries, consumers said that the main reason for the choice of packaging was that that was in fact the only one available, indicating that the retailer really was shaping the choices available for the consumer. However, what was interesting was in the UK and in China, the perception as to the sustainability of the packaging was a top 3 influencer. And when we asked consumers specifically to think about what they perceived to be the #1 sustainability priority for meat packaging, recyclability and the amount of packaging were key priorities for them. So as Alan mentioned before, food packaging plays a critical role in protecting food and extending shelf life in the supply chain. And when you consider that the carbon footprint of a kilo of beef is 370 times more than that of the packaging, it's important that we look for ways to keep meat fresher for longer. So Sealed Air's focus has been on engineering packaging that provided the maximum amount of shelf life for the lowest amount of material and therefore environmental impact. This graph shows the relative advantages of our new Darfresh on board solution that you may have seen on the retail shelves already. It's driving down the impact by taking into consideration the total carbon footprint of materials, its disposal, the impact on food waste, the packaging energy used, the material transport. It's a great example of how we are innovating to lower the overall carbon footprint of the materials used while delivering smaller portions for consumers. To achieve these extended shelf life outcomes, the flexible plastic used in these structures are made up of multiple layers of materials, each with a specific purpose. Unfortunately, it's this complexity that makes recycling this material a bit of a challenge. You've heard earlier that there is a trend towards chlorine-free materials. In engineering flexible materials for meat packaging, Sealed Air has used PVDC, a type of chlorine, in its structures for 2 main reasons. The first being that it is highly effective in protecting meat at high relative humidity environments. Studies have shown that the benefits are not just within the primal package, but carry on into the secondary package when it's further processed into retail meat cuts, providing additional days of shelf life. The second main reason that we've been using PVDC is that it allowed us to reduce the gauge in the material, lowering overall plastic intensity of packaging. As you can see from the graph, EVOH, which is the chlorine-free alternative, is highly compromised between 85 and 100% relative humidity. But in order to compensate, structures using EVOH require higher levels of an additive protective moisture barrier like nylon. Nylon is also considered a contaminant in the recycling process, making many of these structures not suitable for recycling either. So given these challenges with barrier materials, how will barrier materials change in order to meet the 2025 targets? In order to meet our pledge, we've invested significant resources in research and development to drive innovation in this area. At the start line, we have some PVDC-based barrier bags that will meet local APCO rules relating to the Red Cycle program. And we also have some chlorine-free structures. However, the recycling status is dependent on the gauge and the country. The tolerances for the percentage of contaminants accepted by retail recyclers differs around the world. And as we move towards a circular economy, we're anticipating further tightening of tolerances on contaminants from recyclers as they look to improve their yields. We also understand that for meat processors, they want to avoid the complexity of carrying multiple structures to serve the many export markets. Therefore, our drivers for innovation in barrier bags is to remove the chlorine whilst minimising any increases in gauge. It also needs to be free of contaminants like nylon and be fully recyclable using the technology found in the world today. First, we will be focusing in on the boneless barrier bag and then moving on to the bone-in structure, creating a recyclable bag. And once we've achieved those significant milestones, we can then start working on incorporating recyclable and recycled content. Now, we're also keeping an eye on recycling technology, as Alan mentioned earlier, and always keen to incorporate these if it can help us achieve more efficient resources and be part of that circular economy. In Europe, Sealed Air has launched Cryovac OptiDure ODF structure, which is our chlorine-free version of the OptiDure presentation bag. This is a great example of redesigning our structures with our pledge in mind, with careful selection of the plastics whilst avoiding materials that could be considered contaminants in recycling. Whilst this product was specifically designed for Europe, we will commence some validations to determine the suitability for the ANZ markets, as we think it may have a role to serve some market needs. However, we think that the significant step forward to changing the game is the development of a chlorine-free RIC4 approved barrier presentation bag. RIC4, or resin identification code number 4, meaning that it will be compatible in the PE recycling stream. This will not only be a great outcome for end user consumer markets, we think it's a critical step in helping to address the barrier bag tail waste problem. Whilst we've paid a lot of attention to consumer recycling, consider the waste that's generated as part of the production process. With materials that are more attractive in the recycling stream, we will be able to divert significant amounts of industrial waste from ending up in landfill. This is the film waste that is generated by vacuum skin packaging after just 1 hour of production. When you think about the amount of plastic that would represent in a year, that's a lot of plastic and resource that is lost as part of the process. And for those of you who are familiar with the waste management hierarchy, while recovery is good, elimination is even better. Our Darfresh on Tray and Darfresh on Board programs that utilises the Mundini equipment addresses this with zero scrap technology, eliminating the waste and the cost. That's 40% less plastic straight up before we even consider the many additional benefits that this Darfresh program provides. Sealed Air is also very excited. We've developed a new reduced trim waste system for the Ulmer machines that uses our Darfresh roll stock. Not only will it reduce the trim waste, it also delivers a faster, more efficient vacuum cycle. And we'll be launching and rolling this out to our customers who have Ulmer machines. Darfresh as a platform has been in the Australian market for years, and we have a high presence in the meat cases across Australia. Australia is very similar to Europe in that both consumers and retailers have really embraced the benefits of vacuum skin packaging. This year, Sealed Air is completing its conversion of PVC-based bottom webs to rPET, which contains post-consumer recycled content. Whilst this material is not ARL approved for recycling, it does demonstrate our commitment to building our capability in creating food contact packaging from post-consumer recycled content. In development for release late next year and early 2022 is the high barrier naked PET version, which will allow for curbside recycling. Another area where meat packaging represents a recycling challenge is with absorbent pads. Each year there are millions of absorbent pads that are buried into landfill. They've long been used in matte packaging to contain visible purge, but could it be costing you more than you think? And could we eliminate it from the packaging altogether? We think so, and we think it makes good business sense too. Not only is there a cost of the pad as a bill of material, there's a labour cost associated with the application of the pad. Often, unused pads are discarded at the end of a production shift as food safety precaution. If pads are not removed from downgraded stock prior to rework, there is a risk that whole batches of product are lost. And the drawbacks are not just within the boning room. The physical properties of a pad continue to soak up not only the natural purge, but wicks out moisture from your product, potentially compromising eating quality. And we also know most consumers are not big fans of them either. A key insight from our behavioural study found that consumer aversion to touching a soil pad is preventing a fully recyclable tray from being rinsed and placed into the recycling stream. And we think we can influence this with a great new innovative design. Our Cryovac Hydrolock high barrier tray not only creates an opportunity to improve environmental outcomes, but provides some great economic benefits for processors and retailers. So how does it work? Using the principles of surface tension, this innovative design enables the natural purge to be captured and retained in the cells, whilst the product supports elevate the product up and away from the purge, allowing the gas mixture to permeate to the underside. The result, a fresh bloomed look that consumers associate with fresh meat, and no discoloration because there's no pad there. And with no pad to dispose of, the consumer is much more likely to rinse and place that tray into the recycling bin. And for those of you who are not convinced that the tray capacity is big enough, well, we're challenging this because we actually think that most pads are overspecified in the first place. A side-by-side test of various meat cuts shows that there was significantly more moisture loss with products that had the pad in the tray than those that were in this padless tray. In this example of 500 grams of stir fry, the natural purge on average was just 3.2 grams, compared to an average of 32.6 grams once you take the weight of the pad out. That's a difference of almost 30 grams of moisture that was lost that could have been retained in the meat. Also in the tray space, we're working on the development of an IR detectable black tray. Whilst the tray itself is recyclable, the mechanical sorting equipment has trouble identifying black trays, and hence it can't carry the ARL logo. With new resin technologies, we hope to complete our testing and validation in order to have these trays available by the end of the year. There's no doubt that there's a lot of interest from consumers and retailers alike on the credentials of the packaging. And we think it represents a marketing opportunity to market the benefits of your packaging choices and perhaps even provide a point of differentiation. Your packaging choices can support your brand image and help communicate your brand story, as in this example. Hazeldene's launch of a premium range called the Bear Bird. 100% antibiotic-free, vegetarian-bred, free-range chicken appeals to consumers looking for a natural choice. They chose Darfresh on Tray, not only because it stands out on the shelf and gets consumers' attention, it served a far greater purpose. It delivered a 25% increase in shelf life over the MAP format, which in turn enabled the brand to achieve a wider distribution and allowed the retailer much more time to sell through this premium product. This was first recognised by winning the Save Food Packaging Peter Award last year, and then went on to win the World Star Packaging Award in the same category earlier this year. The Save Food Packaging Award recognises companies that have developed innovative and sustainable packaging solutions addressing food losses and minimising food waste. And Sealed Air has been very proud to have been part of that achievement. And that brings us to the end of the formal presentation. We'd like to thank you for taking the time to learn more about the trends and drivers that are shaping meat packaging. There's no doubt that packaging requirements will continue to play a role in market access, but we don't want you guys to think of it just from a compliance perspective. We see it as an opportunity to respond to industry and consumer needs. At Sealed Air, this is a top priority for us. It's a challenge that we've embraced around the world, and we're working towards making a difference. And as Alan pointed out at the beginning, living up to our purpose to protect, solve packaging challenges, leave the world better than we found it. Now let's open up to some questions using the chat panel.
So Anna, we've got one question that's come in so far. Sorry. Do customers actually want their meat to look red at the cost of poor meat quality from modified atmospheres, or are they actually satisfied if all the meat is the same colour across the shelf, i.e. red, purple?
Anna, do you want to start on that one, or would you like me to?
Sure. That's an interesting question. I haven't actually got a specific study that points to red, the meat colour. I understand that there is a difference in acceptance from different markets around the world. Like in US, for example, they do associate the red meat colour as being fresh, whereas in Europe and in Australia, where we've got much more prevalence of the vacuum skin program, they're used to seeing the purple colour. But ultimately, it's and this is me as a marketer talking, it's the experience that the consumer has that will drive the repeat purchase. So I guess, you know, it does account for habit.
Look, I could just add to that, having been part of the retail meat landscape here for a decade or so, watching that change go through and being heavily involved in it with Sealed Air, it's been really interesting to watch. Initially, probably the first major retail splash with vacuum skin and purple meat was Coles Finest steaks, launched probably somewhere around 12 years ago now. And back then, there was real concern about Australian consumers and the negative image or feeling around the different colour of meat. And I think it was really today it's really boiled down to a change resistance. I think that people, once they've tried it, understand the value and the experiences Anna talked to. And for quite some time, we actually, on our retail shelves, segregated vacuum and non-vacuum so that it wasn't really obvious that there's such a colour difference. You know, there was concern that if we put packs side by side, it would be really obvious and that would be problematic. And it potentially would have been. So there have been two things that have really driven success here. One is vacuum skin has typically been launched on new product launches. So it hasn't been swapping a product from, you know, an MAP format overnight into a skin format, therefore the consumer not following the change. It's been more around associated with launches of new premium products through until the last couple of years where we've seen it roll into more mainstream categories. And that's because we're now at a point in time where there's enough consumer awareness and acceptance of it in Australia that we're okay with understanding the difference by consumer and actually having packs mingled on the shelves today. So as Anna pointed out, that's not the same around the world. You know, North America struggles with it quite a lot more and are further behind us in the consumer understanding space, if that makes sense. I don't think the cases need to be consistent. I think that some products still probably do well because of their redness. You know, mince springs to mind. I think if we turned mince into a purple-looking pack overnight, I think there would be some consumer pushback on that. Thanks, Amanda. Anything else come in?
Yes, so we've got a number of questions. Anna, do you want to, can you see them there, or would you like me to read them out?
Yep, I've got them. So when do you think we will have access to the red cycle for industry? Process waste currently isn't available.
Perhaps I can take that one. I'm Sealed as a partner, and I know Liz, the founder of Red Cycle, very well. She is very committed to generating better outcomes for in a space that didn't have a solution, and that's really, as a household, you know, as a mum and as a householder, not having a place to put those materials and recover them. So her focus, that program's focus, I believe, will remain in the post-consumer space. I think that the Red Cycle Soft Plastics program today does not have the capacity for business-to-business waste. So we will be looking for new infrastructure, new programs, and bespoke collection programs for business-to-business waste. As I see it, we might see the kind of adoption maybe softly into maybe office areas, soft industry, if you like, retail perhaps more, but in terms of, you know, like an abattoir or a primary cutting facility opening primables bags, that is not on the agenda.
The next question is, what are the avenues for collaboration on sustainable packaging with universities and research institutes? I guess most of our research and development is done all over the world, so we are collaborating to a certain extent in terms of keeping up to date with the advances in that technology. We have in reorganisation, the head of our innovation and development area was actually our sustainability lead. So it's front and centre in terms of the design and execution of all of our new products that we're working on throughout the world. Alan, do you have anything more to add on that question?
Yes, there's a number of people that are funding programs both at an NGO or a government type level, as well as private industry level within universities. Some of the ones that I've been a part of have been around helping, for example, I can't, perhaps the AMEC team might like to comment, but I certainly have met with PhDs under MLA and briefed them on some of the challenges within the red meat industry. I've met with and briefed students at RMIT on the similar topic, and Sealed Air regularly hosts groups of students from senior packaging design courses through talking about the challenges around sustainable packaging. And one other area that stands out to me, albeit not specifically around the end of life of plastics, but specifically around food waste, is we are also primary sponsors of a program with the Australasian Institute of Packaging, designing sustainable packaging guidelines for designing out food waste, which is underneath the Fight Food Waste CRC here in Australia. and that currently employs 2 PhDs, I believe. So there is quite a lot of opportunity for it, but it is ad hoc managed by various organisations as they choose to pursue particular outcomes.
Another question here is the Hydrolock barrier tray available for industry use? So if I understand the question correctly, it is available for use. We've primarily pitched it for the retail space, and we have actually expanded the number of sizes available. We're also doing some work in expanding and testing the concept in different proteins. So watch this space, I guess, is the answer. I think if there is another use that we haven't covered that's outside of the retail space, we're certainly open to exploring, understanding how we could potentially innovate to solve that problem using our existing design.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, we're slowly moving it out across all of the different shapes and sizes that we manufacture. And if people are using those in within industry applications as opposed to post-consumer or consumer targeted applications, yeah, of course they're available.
Okay, there's another question. It's from Dr. Mark Brown from the University of New South Wales. As an environmental scientist, I really enjoyed hearing about your sustainability partnerships and measures. I was wondering whether you had considered broadening them to address concerns consumers have about microplastics, and if you had considered working with scientists to help re-engineer packaging so that it emits less microplastic and causes fewer impacts to humans and wildlife.
Look, I'd say thanks for that. It's a great question, and perhaps one that we could follow up with you on if we can make the connection, because I'd be interested to see what we are doing inside I&D to look at that particular challenge. My relatively coarse understanding of it is we are very focused on how do we retain the value and resources of our materials and reduce leakage. So recycling and recovery programs so that products are not lost anywhere along the supply chain or into landfill and diversion from landfill. And also all of our sites have spent a lot of time and effort working out how we ensure we don't have any leakage from our sites ourselves, and there are various programs around that in terms of collection of the resin beads, for example, and collection systems to prevent any leakage into the environment, stormwater drains, etc. That's the extent of how I understand that we're looking to prevent plastics from entering the environment. Whether there are options for design of plastic polymer matrices to stop them turning into microplastics or breaking down into microplastics over time is beyond me, I'm afraid, but we could perhaps take that one on notice.
I think that's all the questions.
We've just got one more, Anna, that's come in, which is a big challenge for processing sites. How do processing sites tackle the challenge of blood contaminated packaging for potential recycling? Is it just as simple as a basic clean?
Anna, do you want to have a go at this one, or would you like me?
Sure. So we've got, this is well and truly on the list of projects and challenges that we're working on. So if we think about the material, yes, it needs to be cleaned. That's definitely the first step. But there's the secondary step is that the barrier material itself needs to be able to be recycled. And then thirdly, there's got to be an infrastructure in place, a market per se, to collect it, recycle it, and turn it into something. So that's one of the projects. It's a really big project that we're working on, is to look at various parts of the world, understand how how we can change the barrier bag, and I think I mentioned that earlier in the presentation, that we're doing our bit to change the structure to make it more recyclable. Then we need to figure out the middle bit in terms of the how do we clean it and remove the contaminants. And I've been exposed to a couple of wild ideas that may end up being something that we consider. And then the bigger idea is, well, is there a market that could take that the end result and use it for something else? Ideally, it'd be awesome if we could keep the material within, let's say, the ecosystem of the meat processing site. So, you know, could we turn it into material that is used for some other plastic that is used within the site? Or as the secondary option, you know, is there some industry adjacent that could potentially use this material as part of their input?
I'd just like to add that I'm probably smiling a fair bit about that one, because that's a topic that's near and dear to both Anna and my heart. We're both very passionate about this particular topic, and I like the idea of this concept of perhaps microcircular that Anna's talking about. How can we create a solution that takes care of that program here, takes care of that product, cleans it up, recycles it, turns it into something that's desirable, sellable, or usable by the industry? And we are funding some research in that space. Why? Because we think it needs to be done, and it's something our industry needs to solve. And secondly, to be honest, it has not been done well anywhere around the world. So who knows? Maybe Australia can lead the way here.
Fantastic. Thank you both, Anna and Alan, for your valuable contributions today to enlighten processes and our extended audience. It's been an amazing webinar. You've created a lot of discussion, and I'm sure you'll get a number of questions being directed to you as well. In terms of all the new technology, things are changing so rapidly and so quickly, so it's exciting to be part of the journey within red meat processing at the moment. And, you know, as we look back on this webinar, probably in 3 years' time, how far things will have gone even further. I really like the concept around that microcircular sustainable practices as well. So, and I think, you know, a lot of the industry and what we're hearing out there is that people are really interested in that sort of those systems and those technologies. So hopefully we'll be able to continue to move forward. So thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, and once again thank you to Anna and Alan for participating today and giving us all your wealth of knowledge. It's been fantastic. Just in closing, just like to let you know that there will be a survey sent out. If you could fill that out, that just gives us a little bit more information on the direction of these webinars moving forward. I'd just like to let everyone know next week's webinar is going to be presented by Bondi Labs, and it's around creating visibility in the supply chain using intelligent inspection and data technologies. So we might be heading into space next week, who knows? So I look forward to that webinar. Thank you all and enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you all for your time, and thanks very much for the invite to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you.